Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh Jeffries video. In this video, I'm going to be restoring what is often referred to as the first ever real smartphone. This of course is the first generation iPhone from 2007. This phone was revolutionary and changed the way in which we lived our lives forever. The first generation iPhones have become quite collectible and often fetch hundreds of dollars if in good condition. However, this one hasn't fared too well. Its display is cracked and has a dead spot of pixels, which is quite common on these early iPhones. It also has a missing antenna cover and dodgy power button. So I'm going to be resurrecting this almost 13-year-old iPhone so it can be a wonderful addition to my collection. Of course, we can't fix it without some new parts, but getting these parts for the iPhone first generation is extremely difficult. Because of this, I was unable to source a new battery or housing. However, I was able to find a replacement display, power button assembly, and antenna cover so we can make the device functional and complete once again. As you can see, the phone powers up, but the power button isn't functional unless pressed extremely hard. The screen also has a huge spot of dead pixels, which when pressed, slowly expand out. This of course is not a good example of an iPhone first generation, so it's time to shut the device down, crack it open, and get this thing looking a little bit nicer. The first thing to come off is of course the back panel. Now you would ideally remove the plastic antenna piece first, however that is completely missing on my device. With the SIM card removed, it's time to get this back panel off. This proved a lot more difficult than I expected. If you've ever opened up an iPod Classic, you'll know exactly what this is like. It is held together with metal clips and requires a massive amount of force to be able to be removed. I read online that all you needed to do was insert a tool on the bottom, as I'm doing here, and it would simply pop out of place. This didn't work for me, and I ended up just using a series of picks and spudges to be able to pry along the side and release the clips. Once I had one side removed, I could begin working on the other. I also somehow managed to cut my finger during this process. But with a little bit of wiggling, I managed to get the other side unclipped, being careful to remove the cable before removing the back panel entirely. Getting our first look inside the device, you can see how different it looks compared to any other iPhones. It could actually be mistaken for a clone or some kind of prototype given its internal design. Now that the hardest part of this repair has been completed, it's time to get this phone disassembled so we can change that display. I'll start by removing the two antenna cables which are glued into place. I can remove the camera and 3 screws holding in the logic board. Next to come out is the battery. While we don't see any adhesive strips here, it is held in with a good amount of adhesive, which can make the removal process quite difficult, given the battery is soldered to the board. With our battery free, it's time to get this logic board out of the phone. We'll need to disconnect 4 cables, 2 of which go to the display, 1 is for the ambient light sensor, and the last cable goes to the dock connector. These are quite hard to access given the design of the connections being on the bottom of the board, but with a little bit of luck, we can get those disconnected and remove the logic board assembly. The next thing to go is this shiny frame that goes around the display. A few screws later, we can pull that right off, and this will give us complete access to the clips holding in this first generation iPhone screen. There are clips on each side which need to be removed, as well as a decent amount of glue on the top and bottom. With a little bit of prying and persuasion later, we can remove the LCD. The cables for this display run through the mid-frame, similar to an iPhone 4 and 4S models. So, in a similar fashion, we can feed those cables through and remove the LCD panel. We are now halfway through this display replacement. We can start by cleaning off the mid-frame, removing any glass shards that remain from the old display. We can prep the new panel by installing the earpiece mesh, install the home button again, and now we can install the LCD, feeding the wires through the mid-frame and pressing it down into place, making sure it is adhered on the top and bottom and the clips have all been seated correctly. Next up, we can clean the metal bezel that goes around the display with a toothbrush and a bit of alcohol to remove all that dirt and grime that's built up over 13 years. When we're happy, we can install the frame back in and install its appropriate screws. It's now time to test out that new display, and we can do that by installing the logic board back into the phone. This is actually quite a difficult process as all of the connections are on the bottom side. Now, the best way I found to install this, and I believe this is the correct way to install it, is by starting with the flex cables and leaving the dock connector to last. This cable is coiled around, and removing the tape will allow a little bit of extra length. This extra length is just enough to connect the cable back into the logic board, and we can then flip its locking mechanism, reinstall the tape, and the board is installed. We can push back in our battery, install the antenna cables, and the 3 screws. And of course, install that camera, which is nowhere near the quality of any of the latest phones. It's time to test out our phone and make sure the display panel we installed is functioning correctly, and as you can see, we have no dead pixels, the touch is working flawlessly, and this iPhone first generation is already looking much better. But it's now time we tackled that broken power button. I purchased a replacement flex cable for a total cost of $20 US, which in today's currency is about 30 Aussie dollars. So it definitely wasn't cheap for the component itself, and a lot of that price was actually just shipping it from the States. But either way, I wanted to make sure this phone was functional, and to do that, I needed to spend that extra cash. So it's time to take out the old flex cable assembly and get the new one installed. Upon removing it, the brittle frame actually snapped. It seems to be made of some kind of alloy, and I decided to screw it together whilst it was out of the phone, and it actually broke in another piece. This wasn't going well, and I wanted to get this phone functional, and obviously parts like this are almost impossible to come by. So I have to do a little bit of DIY repair to get this working. So I opted to glue the piece back together with some adhesive, and to do that I just basically installed the corner piece, and then the screws actually hold it all together, and it doesn't actually affect the use of either of the buttons. So I was quite lucky in the fact that the 2 screws for the mute switch actually bridged where it was snapped, but as long as it works, that's all that matters. But now that we have that problem solved, it's time to install that power button and get it screwed into place. And I could do a little bit of DIY panel beating to fix the warped headphone jack. I could stick down the cable, give the inside of the back housing and phone a good clean with some alcohol to remove any dirt and dust that is built up inside. I could reconnect the back panel and test out all of the functions. You can see the power button is now functioning perfectly. Both the volume buttons and mute switch are also working great. So I can snap the back into place, reinstall its 3 screws, and get the new rear cover installed. Now this antenna cover I purchased for $14 on eBay. It is brand new, and you can see here how it attaches with its many clips. Now this was one of the hardest parts of the reassembly process. It took me approximately 45 minutes to get this properly clipped in without any gaps. I don't know why it was so difficult, but it proved a really big challenge. Once that was installed, all that's left to do is remove the protective film from the display, and we're done. So this is it. I managed to restore this almost 13-year-old first generation iPhone. While it's not in mint condition, parts are very hard to come by, and as a result, I wasn't able to replace the scratched up housing or old battery. Regardless, this phone is functional and complete. I purchased this phone for $25 and spent a total of 129 Australian dollars including the phone. While such an old device, these are becoming hard to find and can be very sought after by collectors. This one is an 8GB model running iOS 3.0, however, it lacks Apple's lock-on downgrades, so you can freely install whatever iOS version you like. This phone might be old, basic and slow, but remember, without this phone, all our new shiny smartphones, smartwatches, tablets and much more wouldn't exist, as this phone created the foundation to the portable devices in our digital life that we know today. I am fortunate enough to have 4 iPhone first generations. Unfortunately, 2 have cracked screens, but I will be repairing those in the future. The one that isn't pictured here is currently at my parents' house and is the best of the 4 that I own. There isn't many videos online showing how these devices can be opened or repaired, so I hope you learned something from this retro restoration, and maybe you even have one of these devices that you could repair. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the phone restoration playlist for more videos just like this one. And if you're looking to get started with repair or looking for some helpful tips, be sure to check out my new website, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video. I'll catch you guys next time.